Hello and welcome to the show. We're coming to you from Singapore and we'll be putting your questions to Foreign Minister George Yeo. Hello and welcome. It's known as the Lion City and has a booming economy that many countries in the Middle East look to as a model for growth. Singapore is the second largest economy in the Asia-Pacific region and experienced economic growth of just over 8% in the second quarter of this year. But some argue that its success has come at the cost of restrictions on freedom of speech. What do you think? Don't forget, we take your questions and comments. You can find the contact details there at the bottom of your screen. Well, joining us now to look at Singapore's standing in Asia and its future is the country's Foreign Minister, George Yeo, who has just taken over the chairmanship of the Standing Committee of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Minister, good to have you on the show.
Happy to be here, Riz.
Well, sir, I have to start by asking you, what is the major concern? You've just got back from ASEAN. What's the major concern, particularly for Singapore in the region right now? Is it security? Or is it economics?
It's integration of ASEAN as a community of 10 countries. The economic integration is very important, and we are in the process of finalizing a charter in time for the leaders to sign in November during the summit in Singapore this year. And this charter will make us a more rules-based organization. It's a legal document, a mini-constitution, and it should set us on a different plane.
Now, Singapore has always been one of the powerhouses, one of the leading nations in the region. How hard is it for Singapore to remain or to keep its competitive edge and stay a regional hub when you have the growing influence of China, for example? Where does it position Singapore in terms of competition?
Well, the re-emergence of China is a challenge, not just to Singapore, but to all of us in Southeast Asia, so to the re-emergence of India. So what we try to do is to figure out what are our strengths and weaknesses and then find niches for ourselves. And that way we'll be able to ride the boom in the region. So we see China and India giving a lift to all of us in Southeast Asia, provided we position ourselves well.
Now, what would be that position? How could you keep yourself unique and accessible?
For Singapore, the key is to globalize, to move the tide, which means to be prepared to change, to shed off old habits, and to learn new tricks. So for instance, and that surprised many people, we've decided to allow casino gambling in Singapore, which was anathema before. Yeah. And that has livened up the entertainment scene. Of course, we've got to do it in a way which doesn't pollute the social environment or to cause families too much difficulties. But I think we'll be able to find a good balance.
Now, apart from that, casino gambling, you're saying shed old habits. That sounded quite loaded. What kind of things do you think of when you think of old habits?
The bias now is for change in Singapore. So whenever we come up with a new challenge, with a new problem, we say, look, can we do it better? And sacred cows are, well, sacred cows, and we're quite prepared to slaughter them if necessary.
Now, which areas, when you look at Singapore, when you look at the younger generation, not so much which areas, but in what way are the younger generation prepared for the more competitive and hard-edged globalizing world that they're facing now?
Well, we've avoided protectionism in Singapore, and we've always believed that it's good for our people to be exposed to the cold wind of global competition. Get them in that frame of mind when they're young. So we have foreigners now in all our schools, even in the primary schools, in kindergartens. So our students are used to competing with foreigners, and many of the foreigners swipe the prices. But it's good for them because they know how they measure up vis-a-vis international standards. So in the universities, in the polytechnics, in all the banks, in the museums, in the research institutes, we work side by side with foreigners. And many Singaporeans also go overseas to try their luck.
Well, sir, as you know, on the show, we try to get the viewer's voice in there and hear from people on the street and so on. And one of the things we did was talk to a couple of people outside, here while we were in Singapore, outside on the street. And one young female student, a Singaporean of Indian origin, who's currently in junior college, had this to say about how she saw the current situation.
I'd just like to ask, with bringing in so much foreign talent, what is being done about the unemployment in Singapore? There's so many people who don't have jobs, and yet you're bringing in more people from overseas. So are you going to retrain the people in Singapore, or how are you going to help them gain employment?
Now, is this a concern you hear much?
Yes, indeed. And this is a concern of a preoccupation of the government and of the trade union movement to see how we can refurbish, regird the economy so that we measure up to the demands of global competition. the key is not to protect work. The key is to get our people prepared for global competition. And we do that through education, through training and retraining, and where people cannot earn enough because of global competition, we subsidize work. And we've launched a program which we call not welfare, but workfare.
How do you avoid making the country soft, though? How can you keep people, I mean, out there, there isn't that kind of protection in other places, so people get a much harder edge. In effect, Singaporeans are going out there having been cushioned to some degree.
No, I don't think so. I believe Singaporeans know that we are vulnerable because we are small, we are a city-state, and that no one owes us a living. So there's an instinct that if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't study hard and prepare yourself, no one owes you a living. And that sense of vulnerability, that edge, is in every family. So I don't see the young people in Singapore turning soft. In fact, they work harder than their parents, many of them.
It was interesting, some of the responses we got. Generally very favorable. People always have good things to say about Singapore, but a few interesting things did come up. And one email we had from Hermosillo in Mexico came from Eric Moncada. And Eric says, Singapore has a zero-tolerance drug policy, sentencing small dealers to death. It is effective, and would you recommend it to countries threatened by drug cartels, such as Mexico? Now, Eric does go on to say if this also means that human rights are secondary to fighting drugs.
No, what we do for the good of Singaporeans, and we do not commend Singapore as a model for anyone else. If others wish to study our little experiment here, we welcome them to. But we're not in the business of prescribing solutions for other people.
Although people do study Singapore, and many countries in the Middle East and the Gulf region have been using Singapore as a financial model, for example, on how to expand and grow. They've seen the success in a short period of time, and they seem to want to copy Singapore. So, you know, what the standards you set, you know, obviously have some impact.
We're a little embarrassed sometimes, and it's good that they learn from us, and we also learn from them. So it's part of a global exchange. We've learned a lot from the advanced economies. But going back to drugs, it is a serious problem. It was a serious problem because we are a hub. Many foreigners go through Singapore. A lot of containers pass through Singapore. And if we are not careful, we become infected. So we have to take very strong measures. And they've been effective.
We had an email that came in from Miami in Florida, our viewers around the world, and Paul W., as he identified himself from Miami, said, free society here in the USA means drugs, obesity, a bad economy, and a country that is slipping into oblivion. I envy Singapore for its order, politeness, and education levels. Now, earlier when you had said about shedding old habits, to some degree, is there the danger you'll also lose that discipline that Singapore is known for?
No, we are constantly retuning our balance point because nothing is good forever. We were stricter, less liberal in the past. I think we are more relaxed now. And the entertainment scene, the creative industries are blossoming. And that's good for us. But at the same time, we don't want to lose our sense of wholesomeness, that this is a good place to bring up your family and that children grow up proper. And there's a sense of safety. You can be a single woman jogging late at night in a park, and you're relatively safe. And it's good to keep it that way. But there's a price to be paid for all that, which means sometimes you get fined for doing certain things, or you get hauled up if you are caught with alcohol in your breath and so on. But it's a package.
Well, we have a caller on the line from Germany. Ranjita, thanks for joining us. What would you like to ask? Go ahead, Ranjita.
I'm Singaporean, and I'm wondering when we will be given more freedom of speech.
Okay, more freedom of speech. When she's asking, when will you have more of that?
I know my children ask me the same question too. No, we've liberalized. There's a speaker's corner, which is hardly used. There's lively debate that goes on in the universities, in the polytechnics, a speaker's corner, in the media. So it is a lively scene in Singapore. But of course, there's certain proprieties, and sometimes Singaporeans feel that the reins could be loosened further. But it is a balance point.
Well, let's get another video clip that we had from a young man who we talked to in the street. He's a young male student who grew up all over Southeast Asia and was educated in Singapore and abroad. He's currently at university in the United Kingdom, and this is what he had to add to our debate.
Singapore's a great advertisement for what Southeast Asia can achieve. I mean, you look around and the cultural diversity and really just the efficiency of the entire country is just amazing. A lot of people look at Southeast Asia and tend to think of corruption, dirt and general poverty, but Singapore's a great advertisement for Southeast Asia as a whole.
Now, beyond Southeast Asia, as I'd mentioned, that the Middle East also has, you know, sort of a strong affiliation for Singapore, not just from the sort of financial models, but also, I think, as a society, I think there's a lot of respect. And I wonder, in return, how Singapore regards the Middle East region as potential partnerships, as a potential area for growth and business.
Our links to the Middle East have grown dramatically in the last few years. Of course, we're not new to the Middle East. We've always been astride the trade routes between two oceans. And there is a sizable Arab community in Southeast Asia, numbering the millions, for many of whom Singapore has always been a center for Arab culture. We have an Arab quarter here. In the last few years, we've been busy re-establishing our links to the Middle East, promoting Arab culture in Singapore, reviving the use of the Arabic language, and generally making Arabs feel more comfortable here. Islamic banking is being promoted, and I see in the coming years as Middle Eastern countries turn eastwards, partly because they're disillusioned with the West, partly because there are opportunities in the East. I see us becoming an important center for the Middle East in this part of the world.
And of course, I mean, it's very much a technological hub as well in some ways, Singapore. And I know you yourself, you're a big fan of technology. You actually have a blog.
Well, I don't have my own blog sites. I contribute to two blog sites belonging to my friends. And I've been having fun.
What made you do that? What made you go in that direction?
Well, it was a new medium, and I felt I had to try it, learn new tricks if I could. And my friends, put me up to it. They said, why not you try? And so far, it's been quite interesting.
How's the feedback been?
Not too bad. I get criticized, I get flame from time to time, but on the whole, not too bad.
That's an interesting thing because the internet is, I mean, to some degree, a disruptive technology. It's, you know, it is total freedom of speech in theory. It is a very open medium. How can you see the internet technology and, you know, the sort of growth of communication online, citizen journalism and stuff? How can you see that developing in Singapore? Would you want to have kind of more control on it? And what impact could it have on the society here?
I was for many years a Minister for Information, and in a sense a regulator of the internet. And we knew from very early that there are limits to what you can do. But it's not all freedom, because there are things that you can do on the internet for good or for evil, and we've got to be watchful. And there are people out there who will try to harm you. There are people out there who will try to do you good. And whoever is regulating the internet has to have a sense of proportion and a sense of its limits. But it is not impossible to control aspects of the internet. The Chinese do it.
Yeah, and of course there is how it affects perceptions, and I guess one of the key things, and certainly for, you know, our viewers in the Middle East, has always been how, you know, religion, for example, Islam is portrayed and so on. I wonder, in the same way that in some countries, and particularly in the West, there is suspicion regarding Muslims and suspicion regarding Islam, has that featured in any way in Singaporean community at all?
We are a multi-religious society, and there are always problems. And you begin the day realizing that there are problems and acting to avert them, or when they arise, to solve them. And because we are eternally vigilant, so we are able to maintain a certain degree of harmony here. But the moment you lower your guards, the moment you take things for granted, they get out of control. You need to look after the garden all the time.
But there's a bit of a paradox here, because what you're saying is, on one hand, you have to be able to shed old habits and you know, it's taking a certain direction, and yet on the other hand, you say you have to be vigilant. So how do you strike the balance? How do you give the kind of freedoms that people are asking for, and yet not lose grip on what you feel is the basis for security and a thriving society here?
We can't be a risk-free society. We've got to take risks in order to make a living. And we've got to keep in touch with changing mores, changing technology, the changing views of a new generation. And the key to all this is not to be an ivory tower, but to stay in touch, to travel, to know how people are reacting, to be in touch with the younger generation, and then make adjustments along the way. Evolve continuously rather than dramatically. That's our preference.
Well, Minister, I have to put an email question to you that came from Vancouver in Canada. And Mark A, as he put it, in Vancouver says, Vancouver has the distinction of having one of the worst drug problems in the West. I would jail the judges that let this drug culture thrive. I hail Singapore. Lee Kuan Yew is a great man and he's building a fantastic legacy. Now, one of the key things is the Minister Mentor, as he's known now, has been a very strong figure, a very strong charismatic figure. As Singapore goes forward, is there, he's obviously going to leave a legacy, but is there that same kind of strength of character emerging in the young Singaporeans? Can you see that kind of leader emerging in Singapore that has the same sort of dramatic character?
No, I don't think Singaporeans want Lee Kuan Yew to be reincarnated in a younger leader. It's a different society now. It's more middle class. It's much more educated. The challenges are different. So it's got to be softer. It's got to be more variegated. And that's the future.
And in terms of, about 30, 40 seconds left to go, where do you see Singapore, let's say 10 to 15 years from now? Can you see any major changes here?
Well, we're becoming more and more the London of Asia. That means being cosmopolitan, but remaining authentic, retaining a sense of ourselves, not becoming an artificial construct. It's a matter of finding the balance and making adjustments as challenges hit us. And I think we're surviving. We are sailing along.
Minister George Yeo, it's been a real pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for spending the time with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for being with us as well. We'll be broadcasting from Singapore tomorrow at the same time, looking at religions as brand and asking, what does brand Islam represent? Now, don't forget, we'll be tapping into expertise from those attending the Global Brand Forum taking place here in Singapore. If you have any thoughts or ideas or any questions, drop us an email at riz@aljazeera.net. And we'll see you tomorrow. Don't forget, Street Talk is coming up next.